Also this morning, Walkout Wednesday. A lot of focus today here for us on the strikes, the biggest day of industrial action for many, many years, for as long as I can remember. Particularly today because rail workers and others have been joined by teachers. A number of picket lines being set up at the school gates outside Cheney School this morning. Our political reporter is Claire Starr. Morning, Claire.
Good morning. Yes, I'm standing outside Cheney School in Headington, where as the sun has started to rise, teachers have started to gather on the picket line. Cheney School is alongside a main road, so as people drive past, cycle past, scoot past, we have heard some beeps this morning, some waves of support as well. There's a number of teachers gathering here, all with signs saying strike for your right to fair pay, and calling for more funding. Basically, this is one of 30 picket lines across the county. Today, Cheney School is closed for most pupils. It's open to year 11 and 13, as well as vulnerable students or children of key workers, but is closed to everyone else. George Buchanan is the NEU rep here at the school. George, why are you here this morning?
I mean, the demands of teachers are very simple and very straightforward. What we're asking for is a fully funded, above-inflation pay rise. In real terms, teachers have seen their pay fall over the last decade.
So why did you feel it was important to be out here, gather your colleagues out here on the picket line?
What we're witnessing across the country is a real moment in trade union behaviour, okay? For a long time, trade unions have had their powers stripped away. We know they've had those anti-democratic, anti-trade union laws brought in, which required a certain threshold to be met in the ballot, okay? And we've shown that trade unions are not being beaten by these laws, that we're stronger than ever, and we're very willing to demonstrate that strength on the picket line as necessary.
Why is that call for more pay for teachers important to you? Why do teachers feel they need that rise in pay in line with inflation?
If you look at the state of schools at the moment, it's really clear that we've got a recruitment crisis, we've got a retention crisis. The people that feel the brunt of these crises every day are the students. They're the ones who really feel the brunt of there being insufficient funding in schools. The reason teachers are out here calling for more pay is for the benefit of those students. We're the ones who are really committed to students learning.
But some might say that during the COVID pandemic, lots of students and pupils were really affected. Their education was affected. This is another day of disruption for those pupils. What would you say to those parents who are concerned that their children are missing school once again?
If somebody said that to me, I would show them the letter of support we've been sent from the students, which contained dozens and dozens of signatures, which showed they were fully committed to being behind us on this strike. They realise they're losing a day's learning, but they realise that is all for a greater cause. I will show them that letter.
Thank you. That's George Buchanan, who's the NEU rep at Cheney School. This is the start of what will be a day of action, effectively. There's a rally going on in Oxford later today. It's also the first of 4 dates that are currently planned for strike action for children in this county. There's 3 more set in this county, 7 nationally, but 3 more in Oxfordshire. So plenty more to come, it seems.
Yeah, a lot of noise there as well this morning. Thank you very much to Cheney School this morning. Our political reporter Claire Starr. The Schools Minister Nick Gibbs says it's disappointing that the National Education Union has decided to go ahead when discussions on Monday had been constructive. He's also highlighted the impact of the strikes on children's education, as Claire was discussing there. Do you support the teachers? Do you agree with what you've just heard, or do you think they should be in the classrooms today? Luke says, I think teachers should get what they need, but they're letting down our kids who missed enough education during the pandemic. The government needs to sort this out. And from Graham, when the government talk about the 5% offer to teachers, they fail to mention they expect schools to find the money from existing budgets. And he says schools, like the rest of us, are struggling with energy costs, and that any pay rise will mean cuts in staff. He says, rather like turkeys voting for Christmas, I have 3 teachers in my family. I know the pressures they face each day. I'm on 0808 100 9100. Give us a call this morning and tell me very simply whether you support the teacher strike this morning.
The sound.
The sound of Oxfordshire.
David Prever's Breakfast Club.
BBC Radio Oxford.
So what else? A number of Oxfordshire schools closed or partially closed today. Around 30 picket lines are set up across the county. Our political reporter Claire Starr has been outside Cheney School for us this morning. Claire.
Good morning. Yes, I'm standing outside Cheney School, which is closed today, except for Year 11s and Year 13s, and for vulnerable pupils as well. As the sun came up this morning, teachers gathered on the main road outside the school with signs calling for more funding for right to fair pay. They've had, as you can hear, some beeps and waves of support as people drive or cycle past. I'm joined now by Sean and Catherine, who are both teachers at the school. Why are you here, Sean?
I'm here for a fully funded pay rise for teachers because it's clear there's a crisis in retention and recruitment of teachers, and this is affecting our children's education. It's not good enough. This has been going on for years, and the government has not listened. They say they're coming to the table for negotiations, but they haven't even got out of bed. They haven't even got their slippers on yet, let alone come to the table.
What impact is this having on teachers and students and the school?
What impact is it having today?
The lack of funding, what impact is that?
The impact is having... we're not being able to turn the heating on. You can look at our buildings over there. They're old buildings. They need repair. They need windows replacing. I work in a classroom with single glazing, which is usually 16 degrees in the winter, going down to 11 over in the coldest days. That's for our children, those with health conditions, to work in. I'm a science teacher, and we're trying to recruit technicians, our support staff. We need all the equipment to do the practicals properly. There's been real terms pay funding cuts over the last 10 years to both staff pay and also school funding. We are protesting for both. We want our best teachers to teach the students to the best of their ability.
Thank you both. This is the start of what's set to be a day of action. As you said, 30 picket lines across Oxfordshire and a rally and march set to happen later today as well.
Claire Starr, thank you. Lucy Coleman is Joint Branch Secretary for the National Education Union in Oxfordshire and teachers at a local primary school. Good morning to you, Lucy. You're on a picket line. What's the mood like amongst your colleagues there?
Good morning. The mood is really positive. You could probably hear them in the background. And we've been, our school is closed apart from to vulnerable children. So we've been chatting to parents as they've been dropping their children off this morning, and chatting to our support staff who unfortunately can't join our strike action. And they're all very supportive.
We understand, I think, why you're walking out. We've heard a lot of that this morning. But for you personally, was this a difficult decision or was it a no-brainer, Lucy?
It's always a difficult decision. Of course, as teachers, we don't want to be standing outside the school. We want to be inside with our students teaching. But unfortunately, years of funding cuts from the Conservative government and years of reductions in pay and the difficulties in recruitment and retention, all of these things, they've forced us into this strike action.
And I suppose there's a why now question as well as a follow-up. I mean, I've heard these arguments for years from you and your colleagues. In a sense, nothing has changed. It's always been about funding and pay and so on. What was the tipping point for you that meant that you had to walk out today and will continue, no doubt, for the next few weeks?
I think the tipping point is the cost of living crisis and the fact that, we are seeing so many of our pupils and families in desperate need, not being able to afford to, pay their bills, to heat their homes. And, teachers and support staff are now at that point too. They're at breaking point. Support staff are leaving to go and work in local supermarkets because they can get paid more there, and they do such an important job supporting those vulnerable children. How can they do that if they're vulnerable themselves?
And a lot of those families and parents won't be able to earn a living themselves today because they've had to take time off to look after the children that should be in school. Do you have sympathy for them too? What are parents saying to you?
Well, as I said, the parents we've been speaking to have been supportive. We completely understand that this is causing disruption, but that we have got to a point where there's nothing else we can do. We have to show the government that this is serious and we have to get them to take this matter seriously.
Thank you very much, Lucy Coleman, the Joint Branch Secretary for the Oxfordshire NEU, National Education Union. Not just teachers, railway drivers here as well. An extremely reduced service, GWR say. Chiltern Railways, no trains at all, don't even bother heading to those stations. We've also got staff at Oxford University and Oxford Brookes on strike today as well. Earlier, I spoke to Alan Jones. He's the industrial correspondent of the Press Association.
What is really striking, as it were, I think, is that more and more groups of workers are voting to go on strike and are going on strike. So even yesterday, I wrote 3 stories about 3 separate groups of workers going on strike in the coming weeks. It's escalating. It's not. It's not going away. Certainly not going away. Very little signs that any of these big disputes are being resolved. And kind of undermining everything, I think, is this legislation that's going through Parliament about making unions agree to have minimum levels of service during strikes. There's a big protest in London today, protests all over the country about that. That is going to be a very, very, very big issue in the months ahead.
And yet the government's position with all of these strikes seems to be getting increasingly entrenched. Their argument is we can't possibly increase any pay anywhere because that would just add to inflation, which is our number one priority.
Yep, they haven't really diverted from their line that they are not willing to reopen pay rises for nurses, ambulance workers, teachers, civil servants for the current year. Yes, you're right, they haven't changed that. And, as long as that position stays, then these strikes will continue. I keep saying to people, every dispute I've ever covered anyway is resolved when the parties get together and actually negotiate. And that's not been happening in these big disputes. There have been meetings with the Health Secretary, the Education Secretary, the Transport Secretary. They've had meetings with unions in those sectors, but they very rarely discuss pay, and they certainly don't negotiate over pay. So as long as that position remains, and it looks as though it is, these strikes will just continue. I mean, some union leaders are even talking about, the strikes continuing right up to the next general election. And somebody said to me the other day, they think the only way this will be resolved if there's a change of government. I mean, we're some way away from that, but it's certainly there's certainly very little sign that any of these big disputes will be resolved. So we're going to have more days like today. Next Monday is going to be the biggest ever strike in the health service. For example, you're going to have nurses and ambulance workers on strike on the same day. You're going to have physiotherapists and midwives on strike next week. So it is just escalating week by week.
And the government, I suppose, will also be keeping an eye on public patience, that point at which public patience runs out. Maybe it's the moment when they might do something. I don't know. It's a case of who blinks first, isn't it?
I mean, certainly as far as the unions are concerned, they are still getting a lot of public support. Certainly the health workers, there's no question after what they did for us during the pandemic. I think they are getting massive support. The teachers say they get support. Even the rail workers, despite all the disruption of trains being cancelled, the union leaders I speak to on picket lines say that they're getting the most fantastic support from members of the public partly, I think, because so many workers are now involved in disputes. They understand why these strikes are going ahead, and we're talking about, is it nearly 7 million workers are in a trade union? So that's a pretty big body of members of the public anyway. So I think it's holding up. There was an opinion poll earlier this week showing an increasing level of support for the strikes amongst members of the public.
Alan Jones, industrial correspondent at the Press Association. The government says, we hugely value the work of our public services, and we're reaching out to unions to have an honest conversation on pay, conditions and reform. Industrial action is hugely disruptive for everyone. How are you affected today? And do you support the teachers? That's my question for you. Simple one. Do you support them? I'm on the 0808 100 9100. 9:16 BBC Radio Oxford. Talking about the strikes this morning. 500,000 workers on strike today, according to the TUC, making it the biggest strike I can remember in a long time. They say more than a decade. It's been dubbed Walkout Wednesday by the papers this morning. Got university lecturers, train drivers, civil servants among those on the picket line. Also the first day of strike action from teachers. Dr. Mary Bousted is the National Education Union's Joint General Secretary.
The strike that is happening today is very unfortunate. No teacher wants to be away from their class. But I would also say that it is really important that teachers stand up now, because the situation in schools is becoming untenable. And that in the long term and indeed in the present is affecting the education of their pupils profoundly.
Schools right across the county closed or partially closed today. Picket lines outside 30 schools, it seems. Our political reporter Claire Starr has been on one of them this morning outside Cheney School in Oxford. She caught up with teachers Ollie, Ross, Pauline and first Emma.
It's really important to support obviously the NEU's action in terms of recruitment and retention. We've got real issues in the city and we want to make sure that, the education is purposeful and that students get the best they possibly can.
You've been hearing beeps of support as people have driven along on this main road, cyclists ringing their bell. What kind of impact is this lack of funding having on the school and on students?
Yeah, massive. So like Emma said, the big problem at the moment is retention, and especially in a city like Oxford where the cost of living is so high. If teachers aren't being paid what they're worth, then they're having to move out, they're having to leave the profession. And without valuable teachers, students aren't getting the kind of education they deserve.
Ross, what needs to happen? What would you like to see?
Well, there needs to be above inflation pay rise for teachers. As Emma and Ollie were both saying, the industry is really struggling. The government have failed to meet all of their targets for employing teachers in every single subject.
And Pauline, some people might say students have had disruption during the COVID pandemic. This is another day of disruption for them. What would you say to parents who might say that?
So, I would just say that government needs to fund schools so that teachers don't get to strike, so that education is unaffected. And like my colleagues have said, there's a lot of issues that needs to be dealt with. So we request for a dialogue. If there was a dialogue, there would be no strike action. I think it starts from there. And all my colleagues have said exactly the same thing. The government needs to come out strong through the Department of Education and have dialogue with organisations and have people not strike and keep children in school.
Thank you very much, all of you. So this is the start of what will be a day of action. There's set to be a rally and march in Oxford later. There's 3 more dates set for strikes in schools in this county coming up in the next month as well. So this seems to be the beginning.
Claire Starr on the picket line at Cheney School for us earlier this morning.